The Galactic Council had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years. 17 ancient species sat on golden thrones in a chamber so large that clouds formed near its ceiling. They controlled trade between 900 worlds. They decided which species could travel the stars and which must remain trapped on their home planets. They believed themselves to be the beings in existence. Humanity had joined this council only 3 centuries ago. When human ships first appeared at the edge of known space, the elder species had looked upon them with amusement. These small, fragile creatures with their short and loud emotions seemed like children playing at civilization. The council allowed them membership as a courtesy, expecting little from them. Ambassador stood before the council chamber on what would become the most important day in galactic history. She was 67 years old with hair pulled back in a simple knot. Her face showed the lines of a difficult life, but her eyes were calm and clear. She held a small in her weathered hands. High Counselor and watched her from his throne at the center of the chamber. He was a being with shimmering scales that changed color with his mood and 6 arms that moved with careful grace. His species had founded the council 12,000 years ago, and he had served as its leader for 8 centuries. He had seen species rise and fall. He had witnessed wars that burned entire star systems. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he believed. Cleared her throat and began to read from her. Her voice was steady and polite, carrying no emotion at all. The Human Confederacy hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council. All human citizens will leave council space within 90 standard days. We thank the council for the opportunities provided during our membership. We wish you peace and prosperity in your future endeavors. She lowered thee and stood in silence. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Delegates turned to each other with expressions of disbelief. In 12,000 years of council history, no species had ever chosen to leave. Species had been expelled for crimes against the galactic order. Species had been destroyed in wars, but voluntary departure was unthinkable. And raised 2 of his hands for silence. The chamber fell quiet. Ambassador, he said, his voice resonating through the vast space. This is most unexpected. Surely there has been some misunderstanding. What grievances have driven your people to this decision? Whatever the problem, we can discuss it. We can negotiate. Shook her head slowly. There is nothing to negotiate, High Counselor. Humanity has simply decided to go its own way. We bear no ill will toward the Council or its member species. We have merely chosen a different path. But why? The question came from Delegate of the Collective. She was a being of pure thought energy contained in a crystalline form, and her kind had served as the Council's diplomats for. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to sense the emotions of others, but from this human woman, she felt nothing but quiet resolve. Your species has been a valued member of our community. You have contributed much. Why would you abandon all that you have built here? Almost smiled at that, almost. We appreciate your kind words, Delegate, but our decision is final. Human ships will begin the evacuation immediately. We will ensure an orderly transition of all responsibilities. Our engineers will document their work. Our doctors will complete their current treatments. Our teachers will finish their terms. We will leave nothing undone. She tucked thee under her arm and gave a small bow to the assembled council. Goodbye, she said simply. Then she turned and walked out of the chamber. No one tried to stop her. The council members were too stunned to move. They watched in silence as her small figure crossed the enormous floor and disappeared through the distant doors. What just happened? Ambassador of the Empire finally asked. He was a mantis-like being standing twice the height of a human, with blade-like arms and compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights. His species was known for their logical thinking, but he could find no logic in what he had just witnessed. The humans have left us, and said quietly, and they did not even seem angry about it. That was the part that troubled him most. In his long experience, species that left did so in fury. They made accusations. They demanded justice. They threatened revenge, but this human woman had spoken as if she were simply ending a business arrangement that no longer suited her. Polite, professional, final. Over the following weeks, the human exodus began. Massive transport ships appeared at every world where humans lived and worked. They moved with quiet efficiency, loading cargo and passengers with the precision of a species that had planned this moment for a long time. Commander Daniel Hayes watched the evacuation from the bridge of his cruiser, the Starboard Hope. He was 45 years old with a soldier's build and tired eyes. He had served the Council faithfully for 20 years, fighting in their wars, protecting their trade routes, rescuing their citizens from disasters. Now he was helping his people leave. His first officer, Lieutenant Cole, stood beside him. She was young and still believed in the possibility of understanding between species. The departure troubled her deeply. "Sir, they are hailing us again. They want to know the real reason we are leaving." Daniel sighed. "Tell them what we have told everyone. Humanity has chosen a different path. Wish them well." "They will not accept that answer." "They do not have to accept it. They just have to hear it." On every world, the pattern repeated. Human engineers who had maintained critical systems for decades handed over their duties with thorough documentation and professional courtesy. Human doctors completed their patients' treatments and trained local staff to continue the work. Human teachers finished their lessons and said gentle goodbyes to students they had grown to love. And when the 90 days ended, the last human ships gathered at the borders of Council space. Millions of humans who had built lives among the stars looked back at the worlds they were leaving behind. Some cried. Some felt relief. Most felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The Starboard Hope was among the last to depart. Daniel stood at his viewport and looked at the distant lights of Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council. "Do you think they understand?" asked softly. "No," Daniel replied. "Not yet, maybe not ever, but that is not our problem anymore." He turned to his navigation officer. "Take us home." The ship's engines hummed to life. The stars stretched into lines of light as the faster-than-light drive engaged. And then the Starboard Hope was gone, leaving behind a galaxy that suddenly felt very cold and very empty. In the council chamber, and sat alone on his throne long after the other delegates had departed. He stared at the doors through which had walked, and he felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. Not of human weapons or human anger, but of something far worse. The fear of a being who has made a terrible mistake and does not yet understand what it was. The humans had not threatened, they had not demanded, they had simply said goodbye. And that silence was more frightening than any war cry could ever be. 3 months passed after the last human ship left Council space. At first, the elder species tried to pretend that nothing had changed. The galaxy was vast, and humanity had been only one small voice among many. Surely their absence would barely be noticed. They were wrong. High Counselor and called an emergency meeting of the full council. The great chamber was filled with anxious delegates, their various forms shifting and buzzing with nervous energy. Something was happening that none of them fully understood, and they had gathered to share their growing concerns. Delegate of the collective spoke first. Her crystalline form pulsed with worried light. "My people have attempted to contact human space 17 times since their departure. Each time we receive the same response. They acknowledge our message. They express polite wishes for our, and then they say nothing more. Their borders are completely sealed. No trade ships enter or leave. No information flows in either direction. It is as if they have built a wall around themselves." "Perhaps they simply wish to be left alone," suggested Ambassador of the Empire. His compound eyes reflected the chamber lights as he spoke. "We should respect their choice." "You do not understand," and said heavily. He leaned forward on his throne, his 6 arms clasped together in a gesture of deep concern. "In all my centuries of life, I have never witnessed a species behave this way. When they left the council after their civil war, they burned 3-star systems on their way out. They wanted us to feel their pain. When they were expelled for their crimes, they swore vengeance that echoed across the galaxy for generations. But humanity. They thanked us for our time together and wished us well. That is not normal. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Fleet Admiral of the militant arm rose from her seat. She was a species of powerful warriors who served as the Council's military force. Her skin was covered in old battle scars, and her yellow eyes missed nothing. I have spent the past 3 months reviewing every record of human interaction with this council. 300 years of documents, communications, and official reports. I believe I now understand why they left, and I believe we should all be very concerned. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with glowing images and text. In their first decade of membership, humans proposed 17 different reforms to improve council governance. They suggested ways to make our laws more fair and our trade more equal. Every single proposal was rejected without serious consideration. The elder species did not even bother to explain why. We simply said no and moved on. The display shifted to show images of agricultural world blooming with life. Humans proposed a healthcare initiative that would have brought medicine to developing species across the galaxy. They offered to pay for most of it themselves. The council rejected it, saying that such charity would create dependency. When humans suggested sharing their agricultural technology freely with struggling worlds, the council demanded exclusive patents and profit-sharing agreements that made the technology too expensive for anyone to use. And felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. He remembered some of these decisions. At the time, they had seemed reasonable. Admiral continued, her voice growing harder. In their second century of membership, humans began colonizing worlds that the council had declared worthless. Frozen moons, toxic wastelands, barren rocks with no atmosphere. They transformed these places into gardens using technologies we did not understand. And when they demanded that these terraformed worlds be surrendered as council property, humans, they gave up everything they had built and moved to even worse worlds to start again. I remember that, Delegate said softly. We believed we were teaching them their proper place in the hierarchy. 30 years ago, the Admiral continued, a plague swept through space. Your people were dying by the millions. Human medical ships arrived within days, uninvited but desperately needed. They worked for 2 years to develop a cure. They succeeded. They asked for nothing in return except friendship. And how did the council thank them? By reducing their voting weight as punishment for entering sovereign space without permission. The delegate's crystalline form flickered with shame. 12 years ago, human engineers prevented a catastrophic failure in the power grid. If that grid had collapsed, billions would have died. Humans worked for months without rest to solve the problem. The council responded by increasing trade tariffs on human goods, claiming that their technological advantages were unfair to other species. Ambassador looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. 5 years ago, Admiral said slowly, the Confederacy attempted to wipe out a species that had not yet developed space travel. They had no council protection. They had nothing to offer us. So when they attacked, the council voted to remain neutral. It was not our concern. She paused, letting the memory settle over the chamber. Humanity disagreed. They sent their fleet alone against They lost 14 ships and 9,000 lives defending a species they had never met. When they returned home, the council formally punished them for unauthorized military action. We called them reckless. We called them dangerous. We never called them heroes. The display faded. Admiral stood in silence for a moment. For 300 years, humanity gave everything they had to this council. They shared their knowledge. They risked their lives. They worked themselves to exhaustion trying to make the galaxy a better place. And in return, we took what they offered and treated them like servants. We accepted their sacrifices and punished them for caring. Every time they reached out in friendship, we pushed them away. She looked directly at him. They did not leave because they hated us. They left because they finally understood that no matter what they did, we would never see them as equals. They left because they were tired of loving a galaxy that refused to love them back. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Finally, and spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, and now they have stopped asking for our respect. Yes, Admiral confirmed. They have stopped asking for anything at all, and that, High Counselor, is what should terrify us. An angry species can be reasoned with. A species that has simply given up on us cannot. And thought of all the times human delegates had stood in this very chamber, proposing ideas that were dismissed without consideration. He thought of the human doctors and engineers and teachers who had worked so hard across council space, receiving nothing but contempt for their efforts. He thought of walking out of this chamber with quiet dignity, not looking back. "What do we do now?" someone asked. No one had an answer. The council had spent 12,000 years believing they were the beings in the galaxy. Now, faced with the consequences of their own blindness, they had no idea what to do. And somewhere beyond the sealed borders, humanity was silent, waiting, watching, remembering everything. The weight of 300 years of memory pressed down upon the council like a physical force, and they realized, perhaps for the first time, that they had brought this upon themselves. 6 months after the human departure, the galaxy began to break. It started with small things: a computer system failing on one world, a hospital running out of medicine on another, a power grid flickering in ways that made engineers nervous. At first, the council believed these were normal problems that happened from time to time. They did not connect the events to the absent humans. But the problems grew worse. On Prime, the warrior species that served as the council's military, the central command facility experienced a complete system collapse. Screens went dark. Communications failed. For 3 terrible hours, the military was blind and deaf. General Al led the investigation into what had gone wrong. He was an old soldier with more scars than scales remaining on his body. He had fought alongside humans many times and had respected them, though he had never said so out loud. The investigation led him to a set of abandoned living quarters in the human section of the military base. The name on the door read, "Price, Senior Technical Specialist." Al remembered. The human had served on Prime for 40 years, maintaining systems that engineers had forgotten how to repair centuries ago. He had married a woman named and raised 3 children who belonged to both cultures. He had never complained about the long hours or the difficult work. He had simply done his job with quiet dedication. When the recall order came, had packed his family's belongings and left without protest. He had shaken Al's hand and wished him well, and then he was gone. Now Al stood in empty quarters, reading the personal logs the human had left behind. The words cut deeper than any blade. "Today I fixed the primary cooling system for the 3rd time this year. I told the commanders that it needs a complete replacement, but they said the budget was, so I will keep patching it together. These people depend on me. I cannot let them down. The council raised tariffs on human goods again today. My pension will be worth half what it was when I started working here. Lisa is worried about our children's future. I told her we will find a way. We always do. 40 years of service. They gave me a certificate, just a piece of paper with my name on it. Al tried to get me a proper medal, but his request was, he apologized for hours. I told him not to worry. The work matters. The people matter. Papers and medals are just decoration." The final entry was dated the day before departed. I asked Lisa if she was angry about everything, the way they treated us, the disrespect, the thanklessness. She smiled and said that love does not keep score. I think she is right. But I am tired, Al. I am so very tired of giving everything I have to people who see us as lesser beings. I hope you understand why we have to go. I hope someday you realize what we were trying to build here with you. I hope it is not too late when you finally see the truth." Al read the entry 3 times. Then he sat down on the empty bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Had spent 40 years holding their systems together with dedication and skill. He had asked for nothing except fair treatment and basic respect, and they had given him a piece of paper and told him to be grateful. Across the galaxy, similar discoveries were being made. The collective found that their telepathic communication networks, which allowed instant contact across light years, had been quietly maintained by human psychic researchers for decades. These humans had studied the delicate systems, learned their secrets, and kept them running when they should have failed years ago. They had asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to learn. Now the networks were degrading, and no one knew how to stop it. They discovered that their worlds, the ones where common people struggled to grow enough food to survive, had been secretly supported by human agricultural specialists. These volunteers had worked in obscurity, helping farmers improve their yields, asking for no payment or recognition. They had left behind detailed instructions, but reading instructions was not the same as having someone who cared enough to help. The still rebuilding from the genocide attempt that humanity had stopped lost the teachers and doctors who had volunteered to help their civilization recover. These humans had treated them as equals from the very first day, unlike the council species who looked upon them as primitives. The children cried when their human teachers said goodbye. The sick mourned when their human doctors departed. 1 year after the Exodus, High Counselor and received a message from the government. It was short and devastating. The humans loved us. They protected us when no one else would. They fought and died for our survival when the council voted to let us burn. They taught our children to read the stars. They healed our sick and asked nothing but friendship in return. Now they are gone and we know why. We know what you did to them. We know how you treated them for 300 years. And we want you to know that we will never forget. The message did not threaten. It did not demand. It simply stated facts and went silent. And read it alone in his private chambers, and for the first time in centuries, he felt tears forming in his ancient eyes. On a small mining colony at the edge of space, a young named discovered a storage room full of human medical supplies. Attached was a note written in careful script. "These are for anyone who needs them. We paid for them with our own money. Please use them to help people. That is all we ever wanted. Goodbye and good luck." It was signed by a human nurse named Sarah who had worked in the colony's hospital for 15 years, remembered her. She had treated his mother when she was dying. She had held his hand during the funeral. She had never asked for thanks. He sat in that storage room surrounded by medicine that would save hundreds of lives, and he wept for a species he had never truly known. Throughout council space, beings of every kind were having the same realization. The humans had been everywhere, doing everything, asking for nothing. They had been the invisible hands that kept the galaxy running, and no one had noticed until they were gone. And called another emergency session of the council. When the delegates gathered, he did not sit on his throne. He stood before them like a common petitioner. "I have ruled this council for 800 years, he said. "I believed I understood the nature of power and wisdom. I was wrong. We were all wrong. The humans did not leave because they were angry. They left because they had finally accepted a truth that we refused to see. They loved us, truly and completely loved us, and we never loved them back." No one spoke, no one could. "The question now," and continued, "is whether we are capable of change. Whether we can become the kind of beings who deserve the friendship that humanity offered us for 300 years. He looked around the chamber at the faces of species that had ruled the stars since, before humanity learned to use fire. "I do not know the answer, but I know that we must try, because if we cannot change, then we deserve the silence that now surrounds us." The meeting ended without resolution, But something had shifted in the hearts of the council members. For the first time, they were not thinking about power or prestige or ancient traditions. They were thinking about a species that had given everything and received nothing. And they were beginning to understand what that said about themselves. 18 months after the human departure, the galaxy faced its first true crisis without human help. The Confederacy had watched the humans leave with great interest. They were a brutal species, conquerors who believed that the strong had every right to take what they wanted from the weak. They had feared humanity's military power and moral certainty. Human soldiers had stopped their genocide of the 5 years ago, and they had never forgotten that humiliation. Now with the humans gone, they saw opportunity. Their war fleets launched from hidden bases and struck 3 minor species in a single coordinated attack. Worlds burned. Millions died or fled. They expanded their borders by 1,000 light-years in just 3 weeks, and they showed no signs of stopping. The council gathered in emergency session. Admiral presented her grim assessment. They have calculated correctly. Without human military support, our defensive capabilities are reduced by 40%. Human tactical innovations formed the core of our battle strategies. Human ships were always first into dangerous situations. Human soldiers volunteered for missions that other species considered impossible. We relied on them more than we ever admitted. Then we must develop our own capabilities, argued Delegate. That will take years, perhaps decades. They will not wait. High Counselor and sat on his throne feeling older than he had ever felt before. He had ruled for 8 centuries, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The council needed help, and the only species willing to provide it had been driven away by 300 years of mistreatment. Still, he had to try. We will send a diplomatic mission to human space, he announced. Not to demand, not to negotiate terms, simply to ask for help. Several delegates protested. Pride was difficult to surrender. We have no other choice, and said firmly. We created this situation with our arrogance. Now we must face the consequences with what little humility we can find. Ambassador of the Empire was chosen to lead the mission. His species had the least hostile history with humanity, though that was not saying much. His ship traveled to the edge of human space and stopped at the border, requesting permission to enter. A single patrol vessel appeared to meet him. Captain Maria Santos commanded that small ship. She was 42 years old, born on the red deserts of Mars, and she had served in Earth Fleet for her entire adult life. She had witnessed firsthand how the Council treated her people. She had friends who died saving the while the Council did nothing. She had watched human engineers and doctors work themselves to exhaustion for species that looked down upon them. And she had walked away without complaint when the order came, because that was what humanity had decided to do. Ambassador, she said through the communication link. Her voice was professional and completely neutral. You are at the border of sovereign human space. Please state your purpose. The ambassador took a deep breath. This was the moment that might determine the fate of countless worlds. Captain Santos, I come bearing a message from the Galactic Council. The Confederacy has launched an aggressive campaign of conquest. Millions of innocent beings are at risk. Entire species may be destroyed. The Council respectfully requests humanitarian assistance. Maria was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice remained carefully controlled. I understand, Ambassador. I will transmit your request to the Confederacy government. Please maintain position while they consider your message. She closed the communication channel and sat back in her command chair. Her first officer, Lieutenant Gary, watched her with concern. Captain, what do you think they will decide? Maria closed her eyes. She thought about all the times humanity had reached out to help, only to be punished for caring. She thought about the friends she had lost in battles that the Council called unauthorized. She thought about the doctors and teachers and engineers who had given their lives to species that never bothered to learn their names. "They will ask us," she said quietly. "The government will ask us what we think, what we, the people who actually lived among them and served them and suffered for them, experienced. And what will you tell them?" She opened her eyes and looked at the stars beyond her viewport. "I will tell them the truth, that the Council took everything we offered and gave nothing back, that they accepted our sacrifices and punished us for making them, that every time we held out our hand in friendship, they slapped it away and wondered why we kept trying. Will you recommend that we refuse to help?" Maria stood and walked to the viewport. The distant stars seemed very cold. "No, I will recommend that we do what humans have always done, what we cannot seem to stop doing, no matter how much it hurts. I will recommend that we help the innocent beings who are suffering, because they are not the ones who mistreated us. The common people of the galaxy never voted to reduce our standing or increase our tariffs or punish us for saving lives. They were just living their lives while their leaders failed them." She paused. "But I will also recommend that we make it clear this is not a return to how things were. We help the victims. We do not help the Council." 3 days later, the response came from the Human Confederacy. Ambassador delivered it personally, her image appearing on the communication screens of both ships. "The Human Confederacy will provide humanitarian assistance to species affected by aggression. Medical ships and supply vessels will be dispatched to neutral zones. Refugee camps will be established. Food and medicine will be distributed to those in need." Felt hope rising in his chest. "However," continued, "we will not engage in military operations alongside Council forces. We will not take orders from Council commanders. We will not return to our previous position of serving a government that refused to treat us as equals. When the immediate crisis has passed, our ships will withdraw once more to human space." The hope dimmed, but did not disappear entirely. "We expect nothing in return for this assistance. We ask for no compensation or recognition. This is simply who we are. We cannot watch innocent beings suffer when we have the power to help." Gathered his courage and asked the question that had haunted the Council since the day the humans left. "Ambassador, I must understand. After everything we did to your people, after 3 centuries of mistreatment and ingratitude, why would you help us at all?" His expression softened slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of profound conviction. "Because someone has to be the better species. Because hatred is easy and love is hard, and we refuse to take the easy path. Because we will not become what you believed we were. Is that enough of an answer, Ambassador?" Could not speak for several moments. When he found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "It is more than enough. It is everything." Within weeks, human medical ships appeared at the edges of the conflict zones. They set up hospitals on devastated worlds. They treated the wounded regardless of species. They fed the hungry and sheltered the homeless. They worked without rest, without complaint, without any expectation of thanks. And slowly, the tide of the war began to turn, not through military force, but through something more powerful. They found it difficult to maintain an empire when the people they conquered saw humanity as saviors and the Council as. Resistance movements formed around human aid stations. Refugees spoke of human kindness in voices that carried across the stars. The galaxy began to learn what it had lost when humanity departed, and what it might yet regain if it could find the wisdom to change. 5 years had passed since humanity said goodbye to the Galactic Council. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The campaign of conquest had collapsed, not through military defeat, but through the quiet determination of human aid workers who treated every victim with compassion. They could not hold territory where the people they conquered saw humanity as heroes and their own government as failures. One by one, the conquered world slipped from control. The brutal empire shrank back to its original borders, weakened and humiliated. The council itself had transformed. 3 of the elder species had formally apologized for their treatment of humanity, issuing public statements that acknowledged centuries of injustice. 2 had completely reformed their trade policies, making them fair and equal for all species regardless of age or power. The species that humanity had saved from genocide had withdrawn from the council entirely and established independent diplomatic relations with the human confederacy. But the deepest changes were happening in the hearts of individual beings across the galaxy. High Counselor N, now in the final years of his extremely long life, made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He resigned his position and announced that he would make a personal journey to human space, not as a representative of the council, not as a diplomat seeking terms, simply as an old being who wanted to understand what he had failed to see for so long. His ship approached the human border and was met by a patrol vessel. Captain Brooks commanded that vessel. He was only 35 years old, born after humanity joined the council, raised on stories of human sacrifice and council ingratitude. His entire generation had grown up knowing they were not valued by the galaxy they served. Former High Counselor N said through the communication link, "You are requesting entry to sovereign human space. Please state your purpose." And looked at the young captain's face on his screen. He saw no hatred there, no anger, just a patient waiting for an explanation. "Captain Brooks, I have not come to negotiate or make demands. I have come because I am old and will soon die, and I do not wish to leave this existence without understanding. For 3 centuries, humanity gave everything to the council. I want to see what you have built since leaving us. I want to understand what we lost." Considered this for a long moment, then he nodded. "Permission granted. I will escort you personally." They traveled through human space for 3 weeks and saw wonders he had never imagined possible. He saw the worlds that humanity had terraformed from barren rocks and frozen wastelands. Gardens bloomed where nothing should grow. Cities rose where no one should live. Children played under skis that humans had painted blue with their technology and determination. He saw schools where children of many species learned side by side. Young sat next to young, and both were taught by human teachers who treated every student as worthy of knowledge. No one was placed in a hierarchy. No one was told they were lesser. He saw hospitals that treated anyone who needed help, regardless of their ability to pay or their species of origin. Human doctors worked alongside beings from across the galaxy, united by a simple belief that every life had value. He saw laboratories where scientists pursued knowledge not for profit or power, but simply because understanding the universe made it better. Former council species worked as equals with humans, sharing discoveries freely. "You could have built an empire," and said to on the final day of his journey. They stood on an observation deck overlooking a beautiful garden world that had been a toxic wasteland 50 years ago. "You have the technology, the resources, the will. Why did you not return to council space with weapons and demands? Why did you not punish us for what we did?" Considered the question carefully. He thought about his grandmother, a veteran of the rescue mission, who had told him stories throughout his childhood. "My grandmother served in Earth Fleet for 60 years. She was at the Battle of Prime. She lost many friends that day, fighting to save a species she had never met for a council that called her actions criminal. When she came home, she told me something I never forgot." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "She said that humanity spent thousands of years hurting each other, wars beyond counting, cruelties that would horrify any civilized being. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. But slowly, painfully, we learned that the only way forward was to break the cycle of hurt and revenge. We learned to choose compassion even when hatred was easier. We learned to love even when love was not returned." He looked at N with something that might have been sympathy. We did not leave the council to punish you. We left because we finally understood that we could not change you from within. You had to change yourselves. All we could do was show you what we believed in by living it, even if you never noticed, even if you never cared. But we did notice and said quietly, eventually, when it was almost too late. Yes, agreed, eventually. There was a long silence between them. Two beings from species that had misunderstood each other for centuries, finally seeing clearly. What happens now? And asked, will humanity return to the council? Shook his head. No, we will never again be the species that gives everything and asks nothing. That path led only to pain, but we are willing to be neighbors, partners in trade and science, perhaps with time even friends. He turned to face the ancient counselor directly. The question is whether your species are willing to meet us as equals, not as elder beings teaching younger ones, not as masters accepting servants, as equals with respect flowing both ways. And thought of the 12,000 years of council history, the pride that bordered on arrogance, the assumption that age meant wisdom, the rigid hierarchies that placed value on species based on how long they had traveled the stars. And he thought of what that pride had cost them. I am very old, he said finally. I cannot change what was done. I cannot undo 300 years of injustice, but I can tell the truth about it. I can spend my remaining days making sure the council remembers what humanity taught us. And what was that? Asked. And scales shifted color as emotions moved through him. That true strength is not measured in weapons or territory or the age of your civilization. It is measured in the courage to love when love costs everything. It is measured in the willingness to help those who have hurt you. It is measured in the grace to walk away from those who cannot see your value and the wisdom to leave the door open for their return. He extended one of his 6 hands toward in the human gesture of greeting. That is what humanity taught the galaxy, and that is what we almost lost forever. Took the offered hand and shook it firmly. It is not too late, counselor. It is never too late to choose a better path. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, 2 species began to build a bridge. It would take generations to complete. There would be setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed impossible to continue. Trust broken over centuries could not be restored in days or years. But for the first time since humanity had departed so quietly from council space, both sides were willing to try. Now retired from diplomatic service, watched the news reports of N's journey from her home on Earth. She sat in her garden, surrounded by flowers that had evolved on a planet 90,000 light-years away, and she smiled. They are finally learning, she said to no one in particular. It took them long enough. Her daughter, a diplomat in her own right now, sat beside her. Do you think we can ever truly trust them again? Considered the question. Trust is earned, not given, but the possibility of trust, that is a gift we can offer. What they do with it is up to them. She looked up at the sky, where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening blue. Our ancestors learned to stop hurting each other. It took us thousands of years and cost us almost everything. But we learned. If we could change, then so can they. The only question is whether they want it badly enough. In the great council chamber far across the galaxy, the remaining members gathered to hear N's report. He told them everything he had seen and learned. He spared no detail. He offered no excuses for the past. When he finished, the chamber was silent for a long time. Then, one by one, the council members began to speak. They talked about what they had learned from humanity's departure. They talked about the changes they had begun to make. They talked about hope. The conversation continued for hours, for days, for weeks. And in human space, people went about their lives knowing that somewhere out there, a galaxy that had once dismissed them was finally starting to understand what they had lost. What they had all lost. And what they might yet find together. if they were brave enough to try. The humans had departed quietly, but their silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. And the galaxy would never be the same.